now. So thank you all for joining us. I'm Shira Graubart from Girl Up, and this is Amy from Sanitary, and we're so excited to pass this on to Jennifer to get it started.
Hi, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening. I'm guessing we have folks from all around the world here with us today on Menstrual Health Day, Menstrual Hygiene Day, introduction of new legislation day in the United States. There's a lot going on when it comes to menstrual equity. And I think we have just the period equity dream team here for anybody who wants to know, talk, think, ask about what it means to tackle menstruation in the halls of government. I am going to give a few little factoids right now, a few thoughts of my own, but I really just actually want to pass this on to these three extraordinary lawmakers to tell their stories, to share what it's been like to be champions for menstrual equity in their respective bodies of government. And then I got to tell you, I have questions that I've been wanting to ask all three of you one-on-one and all together forever. So I have a bunch of my own questions that I'm going to pose, and then we're going to try to leave lots of time for audience questions. I have to admit, I don't know the audience question, the Q&A format, if folks are supposed to put stuff up in the chat or how those questions are coming through. So perhaps Shira can share that with us. Do you want to do that quickly, and then I'll pivot back to introductory comments?
Go ahead. I'll talk with Julia on how to figure that out on the side.
Got it. So, okay. So before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I just want to sort of put what we're even talking about into a little bit of context here. We know that menstrual equity is a global issue affecting millions around the globe. In the countries that are represented here at our discussion today, the UK and US, we're talking about 200 million people. And we also know that when folks can't afford or access or be able to experience their own menstruation with dignity, what is lost? The ability to participate in one's education, in the ability to participate in the economy, and truly to participate in democratic life, which I would think we would all agree is paramount. And it's this, for a long time, it was just this invisible, unspoken problem. We know that tackling stigma, tackling shame, tackling marginalization of menstruation is critical to the entire mobilization, to our entire movement. But what happens in the halls of government matters extraordinarily. Policy not only enables us to bring in the entire population and affect the broadest swath of people, but it enables us to express our values, what we're for, what we stand for. It enables us to normalize what we all know to be normal and make change that will affect generations to come. Because of the legislation that these three lawmakers have championed and pushed through and fought to get passed, there will be generations who won't know, who will know a different future, who will know a different story, and they'll be able to imagine, sort of what the next great reforms can be. But we really had to start from square one. I know from my own work, when I started looking into what it would take to make legal and policy change around menstruation, I was kind of floored to see two different things. That one, it was kind of never addressed. And two, when it was addressed in all these ridiculously inconsistent ways that showed that it had never been given serious or critical thought. And it was always, I'm going to use always and never here, because it was always to the detriment of people who menstruated. So how the FDA viewed menstruation and menstrual products versus how OSHA did versus how public benefits did, it never added up. And I would say that these lawmakers who we're about to hear from have figured out how to thread that needle and to make it so that everything from benefits law to tax law to workplace law starts to address the question of what does it mean to fully consider menstruation in the laws and rules by which we live. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to each of them. I'm going to do a quick introduction, although in my mind, we're with rock stars here who need no introduction, and I'm sure y'all know who they are, but I just want to read some of their extraordinary career highlights before passing it on. I think we're going to start with U.S. Congresswoman Grace Meng. We are going to then go to New York Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal, and then to a member of Scottish Parliament, Monica Lennon. I'll ask each of you to give about 5 minutes of your own legislative menstruation story. And then we're going to turn it over to some questions of mine. And I think I'll probably be responding to a lot of things you say in real time too. And then we'll turn it over to Q&A from the audience. So we're going to start with Congresswoman Grace Meng, who is just an extraordinary leader in the US government. She is representative for the 6th Congressional District of New York, first elected to Congress in 2013. She currently serves as member of the House Appropriations Committee, vice chair of its subcommittee on state and foreign operations, and is also on the Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture, Subcommittee on Congress, Justice, Science, and related agencies. She's everywhere. And I think the extraordinary thing that you'll hear in her description of her work is how all of that presence lends itself to holistic, full-throated policymaking. She's, of course, the author and introducer of the Menstrual Equity for All Act, which I'll let her tell much more about. I'm going to do a quick intro for also just summary of achievements of Assemblymember Rosenthal and member of Scottish Parliament, Monica Lennon, so that way I can just kick it over to the three of you. Assemblymember Rosenthal represents the 67th Assembly District in New York, which includes, sorry, I live on the water and there's a weird ferry making noise outside. She represents the Upper West Side and parts of Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan. She was first elected in 2006, only the second woman to represent in 67th District in the Assembly. She's helped pass more than 120 laws that help improve the lives of all New York State residents, and as a leader on issues ranging from affordable housing, consumer protection, substance abuse, animal welfare, and of course, menstrual equity. She is the author of numerous bills that have passed the New York State Legislature, including the elimination of the tampon tax, access to ingredient disclosure on menstrual product packaging, menstrual access for people who are incarcerated, and a new piece of legislation that would require every restroom in New York to provide menstrual products. And then finally, we will turn to a member of Scottish Parliament, Monica Lennon, who is the Labour member of Scottish Parliament for Central Scotland, first elected in 2016. She serves as party spokesperson on the economy and fair work, and was previously party spokesperson on health, a role which she held for 3 years from 2018 till this year. And I think the reason why we're all in awe of Monica is her fearless introduction and pushing to passage of the period products bill, which we all know made Scotland the first country in the entire world to provide universal access to free period products in extraordinarily creative and holistic ways, which I can't wait to hear more about. So with that, turning it over to you, Congresswoman Meng.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone. Hi, I'm Congresswoman Grace Meng from New York. Huge thank you to Girl Up Scotland and Sanitary for hosting today's panel, and my friend and leader of all things, especially on period poverty, Jennifer Weiss for gathering this amazing panel. Also to my friend and colleague from my home state, Assemblymember Rosenthal. I have had the privilege of serving alongside Linda, and I can tell you she's one of the hardest working members of the New York State Legislature. And every time she proposes a bill, I'm like, oh, that's a great idea and much needed. So thank you, Linda, for your work. My colleague from Scotland, member Lennon, thank you so much for being here and for congratulations on your accomplishments. And, you know, it's such an honor to join these incredible champions for today's panel as we celebrate Menstrual Hygiene Day. It's unconscionable that in 2021, there are children missing school and adults who forego opportunities for economic advancement just because they lack access to period products. As we all know, period poverty continues to plague the lives of millions across our nation, especially in light of the pandemic and economic crisis that it's brought on. Women, especially people of color, disproportionately hold lower wage jobs, face gender and racial pay inequities, and are still not guaranteed equal rights under the Constitution. With periods still stigmatized as a taboo topic, it's no surprise that the very basic human needs of people who menstruate continue to be neglected. We know that period poverty impacts every part of our society, from housing to healthcare, from economic justice to education. And that's why we do need to address this issue holistically. That's why I first introduced and reintroduced today my Menstrual Equity for All Act, which is the first ever whole of government approach that comprehensively addresses the unique challenges facing different populations experiencing period poverty. Some of the things my bill does was provide federal grants to provide students with free products in grades K through 12, create a new grant program for higher ed to have pilot programs to provide free products on their campuses, to ensure incarcerated individuals and detainees in facilities have unrationed access to these products, allow homeless providers to use federal monies to purchase these products, require Medicaid to cover the cost of these products, direct large employers to provide free products in the workplace, and this one is especially applicable to my job, require all public federal buildings to have free products available in restrooms. I'm really inspired by Ms. Lennon's fight to ensure that her country recognizes the importance of providing products to those who need them. Also proud that Assemblywoman Rosenthal, along with State Senator Prasad, passed legislation to require ingredient labeling on these products in New York. Transparency in this space is critical for women's health, and we know we cannot achieve menstrual equity without fighting for menstrual health. No student should have to choose between their dignity or their education. No family should have to choose between buying groceries or tampons. And just because someone is incarcerated does not mean, their dignity and self-respect should not be compromised because of these products. Everyone should and needs to care about menstrual equity. So I'm excited for today's discussion. The folks here, you guys are my sheroes, and I really just want to say it's been a special privilege working with Jennifer and Assemblywoman Rosenthal. Women just do it right. We do it differently. There's so many conversations that we've had, whether it's with reporters or experts, and what we do best is we share in the credit and we lift each other up. And I wanted to throw in our previous council member friend, Julissa Ferreras Copeland, as well, for her tremendous work.
Passing it to you, Assemblymember Rosenthal.
All right, thank you so much. I'm Assemblymember Linda B. Rosenthal, and I represent the Upper West Side, parts of Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan. And I'm so excited to be here among this esteemed group of women, the doyenne of menstrual equity, Jennifer Weiss, and of course, my dear colleague, Congresswoman Grace Meng, and Member of Parliament, Monica Lennon. I'd like to thank Girl Up and Sanitary for being here, sponsoring this, and allowing us to have this discussion, because it's something that more than half the population has to deal with once a month at some point in their lives. 10 years ago, if I said menstrual equity, I dare say the vast majority of people would not know what I was talking about. And if they did, they'd probably scoff at the idea. So the work that all of you have done over the years really has brought menstrual equity into the mainstream. So thank you for all of that. Back in 2015, I began embarking on a path that I didn't know would result in meetings like this, when my staff and I were discussing ideas, and we were talking about the pink tax and the fact that women's products that are identical to men's products, aside from the fact that they're pink, are more expensive because they're marketed to and intended to be used by women. And I wondered whether tampons and menstrual products were taxed. And I looked up the tax list, and I found that Fruit roll-ups were not taxed, but menstrual products were taxed. And so I put in a bill immediately saying we got to axe the tax, and didn't pass the first year because I was told that all the money collected from the taxes from these products were essential for the general fund. Like, no, no, no. So the next year, 2016, we did pass it into law. And it was during that fight that I recognized that there was so much more work to do to achieve menstrual equity and address period poverty, even here in the great wealthy state of New York. So I worked to expand access to menstrual products statewide after that, and working to break down the stigma that menstruation still carries today. So I introduced and passed legislation to make menstrual products available for free in public schools across the state in grades 6 through 12. And those products must be available in bathrooms, all gender bathrooms. I also work to make incarcerated individuals statewide not subject to the manipulation of others when they are in need of products. That is not something you can bargain for. You should bargain for. It should all be available to you when you need it and as much as you need. I also passed legislation that now requires New York State schools and healthcare practitioners to provide people who menstruate with easy to understand information about common menstrual disorders such as endometriosis. Working with a coalition of environmental and women's health advocates, I wrote and passed the first law in the nation, which I hope goes international, requiring that menstrual products contain ingredient labeling on the packaging, not in an insert inside, but on the packaging, so everyone can decide for themselves whether they want to put that product inside and on their body. It varies widely from company to company, independent ingredient testing, and testing showed that some of the chemicals in those products had the potential to be dangerous to human health. And so I'm proud that that goes into effect in October in New York. And often when things pass or become law in New York, then other states take some inspiration from that and make the same moves. I've actually seen products by all the large companies now start to put ingredient labeling on the packaging even before they have to by law. So, that is wonderful. I'm chair of the Social Services Committee, and I have seen, as we tussle over how the small amount of SNAP benefits, what's used to be called food stamps, that people get, does not include an allowance for menstrual products. So I'm sure Grace will be tackling that on the federal level because we can't change that in the state, but it's something I'm sure is included in your omnibus bill. I'm just so happy to be here with all of you. And, I look forward to your help getting me to pass in the state what I call the TAMP Act, Total Access to Menstrual Products, which, as Jennifer described earlier, is in every bathroom, there need to be products. And one last thing I'll say is, for all of those who think that we're silly or we're going after something elusive, there's toilet paper in every single bathroom that you go to, or there should be, and you expect it. People who menstruate should have that same expectation, and it should be fulfilled. So I'm sure we're all going to work to make sure that that's true around the world. Thank you so much. And now, Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Linda. It's just so exciting to be here. I've been really looking forward to this event now for a number of weeks. It's a real pleasure to be taking part in the roundtable today, and grateful to Girl Up and Sanitary for bringing us all together for this really important and timely discussion. I think we all share the ambition to continue to change the law and policy, but also to change attitudes right around the world. And I think we're already starting to do that with some impact. We all want a world where everyone who menstruates can do so with dignity, and it's not a lot to ask for. And it's been a privilege to listen to Jennifer and Linda and Grace, and I look forward to our discussion in a little while. And there's so much to say about what we've been doing here in Scotland. I'll have to maybe rush through some of this and hold it back for the discussion, but anyone's welcome to drop me an email after today, and I'm happy to stay in touch and to collaborate. So what did we do in Scotland? Well, as a feminist, when I was first elected to the Scottish Parliament back in 2016, I wanted to take a closer look at the impact of poverty on the lives of women and girls, because we had a situation across the UK where poverty was increasing. More and more people were reliant on food banks for their basic grocery and nutrition needs, including people in employment. So as a brand new member of the Scottish Parliament, I asked the Scottish Government what action it was taking to look at both the affordability and accessibility of period products. And I actually used the term, I think the Parliament Chamber Desk changed it to feminine hygiene products, which looking back, that language does make me cringe a little bit. So already in a few years, we've all been on a journey. And I also asked Scottish ministers their views on stigma around menstruation, because let's face it, periods have been a taboo subject forever. And I have to say, I was disappointed in the very initial answer that I got back from the Scottish Government. The ministers did not recognise stigma as being a problem, and they told me that no work had been done at all on access to period products. And even worse than that, in the response, they said that where a person, a woman or a girl, is experiencing lack of access, then they could go to a food bank. But we all know how difficult it is to admit that you need help, and we all know constituents and people in our communities who can't even afford sometimes the bus fare or the train ticket to get to the food bank, and particularly for women who've got, you know, children, caring responsibilities. So the result is that women stay at home, or girls miss out on school and don't take part in our economy, in our democracy, in the way that Jennifer was talking about. So that was a turning point for me. It did make me a little horrified, a little bit angry, and I realised that policy and legal change was required. I drew up a long list of women's organisations, trade unions, anti-poverty, equality organisations, and asked everyone, what's your experience? I was quite struck by teachers. The EIS, who are the biggest teaching union in Scotland, basically said, yeah, teachers for years have been providing spare pads and tampons to kids in school. So everyone said that they were aware of period poverty. Perhaps that wasn't the language they were using, but they were aware of it, and it was getting worse. So I took some advice from colleagues, did a little bit of media, and lodged a motion in Parliament. And to do that, I had to get cross-party support, and that's been crucial to the work we've done in Scotland from day one. And I was able to secure a members' debate, and I didn't really know what that was, because before I'd been elected, I'd only been a visitor to Parliament twice in the public area. I didn't really know how the whole thing worked, but we got there, we got the members' debate, and that's really important, because that was the very first time in the history of the Scottish Parliament there had been any debate or discussion about menstruation. When I checked back the official report for our Parliament, there was one reference to tampons, and that was a complaint about litter on beaches, which is an important issue, but nothing about women's health and justice for women. But getting that debate was really the start of getting that cross-party support, getting the issue on the agenda. I'll have to race through this, but I then took the big step of saying we need legislation. So launched a national consultation, which started a big conversation about what do people need, because government were saying there's no evidence of this, we need data, we need evidence. So we got that, we went out there and we secured that. We asked people if they felt that a means testing approach would be appropriate. so that only people who were on lower incomes would be able to access free provision. But the vast majority of people said that they wanted this to be universal. They didn't want to be asked awkward questions, embarrassing questions. And we look beyond income to other issues around domestic abuse, gender-based violence, coercive control, and Linda mentioned endometriosis. So health conditions like that were also mentioned, disability issues too. I went out there to show that this wasn't really that radical and bold. So I asked people if they would just go and do it and show government that it could be done on a small and large scale. So we got Glasgow Airport involved, because I had this vision of people arriving in Glasgow, welcome to Scotland, you know, you're bleeding, your periods come on, you're travelling, you know, here's some pads and tampons, take what you need, they are free. And then we got other offices to do the same. And then an amazing grassroots organisation called On the Ball, led by Erin, Orla and Michaela. They lobbied their soccer team or football team, Glasgow Celtic, and said, can we get free period products at the stadium? And the board, mostly men, they said yes. So it taught me an important lesson that if you don't ask, you don't get. So go out there and demand your human rights. So football clubs all over Scotland and the UK started to provide it, and that helped to normalise menstruation. It wasn't just a niche issue for feminist women in Parliament. This was for everybody. And quickly, you know, taxi drivers were talking about it, dads were talking to daughters, granddads were getting involved. It was for everyone. In terms of getting buy-in politically, I asked the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, to agree that period products are not luxury items, they are essential, and she agreed to that. And it sounds like a basic thing, but having the First Minister of the country say that in Parliament was really important. In terms of those early pioneers, if I can name check one, South Lanarkshire College, they decided to replace all of their vending machines that you had to put a coin in and no one's ever got the right change. They got rid of them and put in free to use vending machines in all of their restrooms, including gender neutral bathrooms. And that was a catalyst for more action. And then North Ayrshire Council, who are a local authority, they rolled out free period products in all of their high schools, which was great, and that was the trigger for government doing the same and funding it. And because poverty doesn't stop at the school gate, North Ayrshire went further and said, we're going to make this mainstream in the community. So if you're at the swimming pool, if you're at the library, if you're in the community centre, if you need to take extra home for someone in your family, you know, we're not going to be counting how many pads you've taken. So that was also amazing. I set up a cross-party group on women's health to make sure that menstrual well-being and other issues were discussed in our Parliament. I'll skip past all the data because we all know that period poverty is real. So we believe people who menstruate, we don't ask them for proof. But I want to name check some of the organisations like the Scottish Trade Union Congress, the Scottish Women's Convention, the Poverty Alliance and Girl Guiding Scotland, who were amazing. And cross-party support. Someone had to put their name on the bill, and I'm really privileged to be a member of Parliament and to have that opportunity. But I didn't do this alone, and it wasn't a top-down campaign. It was bottom-up, it was grassroots, it was for everyone. And I'm really grateful to colleagues from all the other political parties who stepped up, even when there was perhaps pressure not to do that, because I have to say there was a time when this bill was in trouble. At the very first stage of the parliamentary scrutiny, once we'd heard all the evidence, and the evidence was so overwhelming, but the committee did not recommend the bill to Parliament. They felt that more pilot schemes, more time was required, was legislation necessary? But that's when we really kind of up the ante on social media, and all that grassroots support was mobilised and people just lobbied their parliamentarians constantly. So we managed to get through stage one, and then of course COVID happened, which was and still is, traumatic and terrible. But the message from us in the campaign was clear that periods don't stop in a pandemic. This is only going to get worse. The need is going to be greater. We need to lock in the good work that government has been doing alongside communities and alongside those early pioneers, and lock that in so that before we got to the end of the parliamentary term in March 21, that was secured for those future generations. So that's what we did. And the bill became an Act of Parliament in January of this year. It has royal assent, and people who menstruate across Scotland are benefiting now. There's a bit more still to happen in terms of the implementation, but we're on track. And I am continuing to work with organisations, including employers and trade unions, to make sure that, as well as schools, colleges, universities and community settings, we get this mainstream in all workplaces. So I'm going to stop there because I think my 5 minutes is up, but I just want to say that really proud of what we've achieved in Scotland, but we were inspired by some of the people on this roundtable and beyond, and there's nothing that says a law made in the Parliament of a small European country can't go global. So I believe that Scotland won't be the last country in the world to consign period poverty to history, but I am incredibly proud that we're the first, and we want to share our good practice with anyone who wants to achieve period dignity for their citizens. So thank you.
That was extraordinary. I mean, all three of you, this is so extraordinary. I just kind of want to take a moment to just say that it's kind of hard to have imagined all of this even 5 years ago. So thank you to all three of you, and everybody who works with you, because you are really leading the way for change. Okay, so now I have a bazillion questions, and I've actually I've called this sort of first question, which is going to be a typical question I will ask, which is going to be like a 5-part question. But from the remarks that you just made, Monica, because so many things that you just said just jumped out at me. So let me see if hopefully I can formulate a question here. And you should know I've thrown my questions that I had pre-written aside, because everything you all have said have got my head spinning. So here's what I would like to ask. And I'm going to ask the US legislators first, because some of it is in response to the things that you, Monica, just reported that you were able to achieve that might look differently in the US. And I kind of want to get their sensibility on that. So I first noted your description of kind of all of the different allies and stakeholders that you brought in. And it's funny, I'm reminded back in the early days of when we were seeking menstrual equity legislation here in New York City with former council member Julissa Ferris Copeland, who Congressman Meng shouted out. And we created here what we called the Roundtable, which was our attempt to sort of do the same, bring in stakeholders from all corners. I know that both Assemblymember Rosenthal and Congressman Meng work with wide coalitions too. So the question I have is sort of like the linkage between what it means to have broad-based coalitions, and then you mentioned cross-party support, which I imagine looks very different in Scotland than it can or could look here in the United States. Interestingly, menstrual equity laws in the States, I think, enjoy a lot of bipartisan support, and Assemblymember Rosenthal can speak to that in New York, but I can certainly share that in states across the country that have passed menstrual access bills, whether for incarcerated populations or in schools, or states that have eliminated the sales tax on menstrual products, there are about as many Democratic states or states that have Democratic-led legislatures or governors as Republican that have gotten it done. So interestingly, we've seen bipartisan support on the ground in a way that might be harder to see in Congress. So and then the third piece of this question, so we're talking about stakeholders, bipartisan, in our case, bipartisan, or perhaps in the case of Scotland, cross-partisan, transpartisan support. And then the third piece of it, meaning being the limits of policy. Here in the US, we focused, I think by necessity, largely on public agencies whose budgets can be reformed to include menstruation and menstrual products. But what you describe, Parliament Member Lennon, about going beyond the agencies themselves and acknowledging that for those who are most marginalized, the ability to even access the agency because of financial ability, because of safety nets being strained in COVID times or otherwise, mean that universal access needs to transcend public agencies. So this is my three-part question for right now for Assemblymember Rosenthal and Congresswoman Meng. How do those facets, how do you factor that in to the lawmaking that you're able to do here? And if there are limitations just because of the very structures of our governance, how can advocates help to transcend that?
Do you care who goes first, or? So first, I want to say, Monica, because of your speech, I was paying attention, but during your speech, I did reach out to my airport contact for our local New York airports, and I asked if we could do the same thing that you got done for Glasgow. So I got a commitment that they would look into it. So Linda, we'll keep on them for that. Look, I think a lot of this for me in the nation's capital was to sort of normalize these conversations, right? And to bring together and to create an echo chamber of support from all walks of life, from different levels of government, talking about what my home state, New York State's legislature was doing, what they were doing at the city council level and the mayor's office, our national and local advocates, validators and experts like Jennifer, and industry representatives as well. And so we've all been having conversations, sometimes separately and sometimes bringing it together. Within the halls of Congress, you know, for example, I had to testify in front of previously the Committee of Ways and Means and Transportation and Infrastructure about these issues. And they probably thought it was a little weird, and, you know, some might have been squirmy as I was talking about those issues. But a huge part of this, for me at least, has been that public education, right? Talking about it with colleagues. I half jokingly believe that some people signed on to my legislation because they just wanted me to stop talking about it with them on the floor of the House. But hey, whatever works, works. But, you know, really, I would say, like, some of the most powerful stories are from our activists, are the personal stories. And, you know, a side benefit of all this, what's been wonderful is that we've seen so many people get involved in this process, civics process, because of this issue, right? They might not consider themselves a political science expert or someone who knows a lot about how government works, but they believe passionately about this issue and wanted to do their part. And they've been able to see some progress happen at all different levels of government.
You know, I think I'm thinking back to when we had the we removed the tax on tampons, and I think it was a unanimous vote on the floor. However, I do think there is some generational and perhaps party affiliation hesitancy to jump into this movement in a full way. For example, a bill I passed and had to go through the health committee to talk about that tampons and products should be available in all bathrooms in schools, grades 6 through 12. And one of the Republican women on the committee said, if you just leave them out, people will steal them. And I said, you know, if people, quote, steal them, it's because they need them. You know, there's no secondary market for tampons. It's not like a fun, cool thing that you steal so you can have. It's because you need it. And I think we need to do more education on period poverty in this state in particular. We've seen during COVID, people who depended on the school supply had no access because we were all locked inside. And that's when we learned more. And I hope you know, that all of New York and its agencies pay attention, that there were many people who could not go about their business because they didn't have access. I think agencies often view things purely through a fiscal lens when, you know, we eagerly give money to so many ventures that have less of a personal impact on people. And so we need to expand government's view, the, you know, internal workings of government, that giving money to ensure that every single person who menstruates has access is noble and needed, just as much as funding the repair of a bridge. So I think, you know, I think it's still a stigma around the world, having your period, discussing it, saying blood, you know, all of that is still has shame attached to it. But I think that all the work that's being done will lead to that abating. And I know when Scotland did what it did, it was in the New York Times and everybody was so excited. And I'm like, see, it can be done. We all just have to dig in and follow the leaders to make sure that it's not a bad thing to talk about, and it's something that we owe our menstruators to do.
On that, I want to take it back to Monica, because you just said something before that was extraordinary, and my head is still sort of wrapping around it. So I want to ask you to tell us a little bit more and maybe advise us as U.S. lawmakers, U.S. advocates and lawmakers here, how we can get more of this notion fueling our own work here. And that is that you've got the government to understand that you need to believe people and not demand proof. It is so hard to collect the kind of quantitative and qualitative data to drive this movement. And there's much more of an attempt to do so now. But that this sort of like anecdotal, emotional connection that we all have to this issue, because we know, because we live it, it is our bodies. And whether we, you know, whether I can afford menstrual products this month or not, this happens to everybody. This is a circumstance that everybody can find themselves in. So that was your comment, that you needed that idea that we needed to lead with our belief in the people versus having to prove it with pilots and things like that. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what that looks like to advance that kind of emotion and sentiment as a matter of governance.
Thanks, Jennifer. Where to begin with that? Well, I suppose in one level, we did look at what a system might look like if people had to present a voucher or a card or some means of identification. And again, the feedback from the consultation was that people didn't like that, didn't feel comfortable. But also that could be quite an expensive and bureaucratic way to deliver a system. So when we spoke to the different local authorities and the education providers, for example, they wanted to have flexibility. So you could have a small university campus, or you could be in the city of Edinburgh where your campus is spread across the city and you've got multiple different buildings. So that's why the legislation is quite flexible for different localities. But overall in Scotland, I guess the ethos of our social security system, which is quite new and developing, we've had a transfer of powers from the UK Parliament to the Scottish Parliament, is that we want to build that system based on dignity. And to do that, you do have to trust people. And again, in other situations, if people commit benefit frauds, there's ways to deal with that. But I think going back to Linda's point, you know, if people are, you know, taking or allegedly stealing period products, it's because they need them. And it got a little bit silly because initially one of the reasons that the Scottish Government gave for not wanting the bill to go ahead, and a very long list of reasons, I think written by civil servants, was that people could come over the border from England and take period products But when you think about that, it's just not logical. You would have to have transport, travel costs, the time and effort to do that, it just didn't make any sense. And actually that got ridiculed, and that actually helped to win the argument. But also people could see the opportunity that if we make this more mainstream, and if we encourage others like employers to play their part, then over time the duty on the state would reduce. And also what we're seeing, which is really encouraging, is a big appetite for people to have greater choice in terms of products, and to have access to reusable products, and to try and reduce and eliminate plastic. So the bill was never about prescribing, one type of product. It's recognising, that choice is really, really important. But we want to see costs coming down overall. And I think there's a bigger campaign here, which is really touching on, again, what Linda's talked about in terms of ingredients and what's in products, is really about, who makes my period products? Where do they come from? What are the working conditions for the people, usually mostly women in factories? And do we have the right conditions for social enterprises, for cooperatives, for women who want to start their own business and develop, alternative products as well? So I think that's a whole other campaign that I would love to get more involved in. But I think if you look at the campaign around fast fashion and fashion revolution, which is very much about who makes my clothes, you could ask that question of period products too.
I love how holistic that answer is as well. And I think that's something that each of you are echoing kind of in your approach here. It's not just a, singular menstrual products are needed by certain people for certain reasons approach. It's this idea that menstruation is actually central to the lives of not just half the population, but truly the whole population. And what would a lawmaking enterprise look like that centered it as we all believe it can and could and should be centered? So I have another question that I want to ask. So I think I'll ask it and ask both of you to answer it. And then I see there's some questions in the chat, so we'll pivot to those. But Assemblymember Rosenthal, you said something really interesting a couple minutes ago, where you compared the need for menstrual products to infrastructure. And you actually said it was the equivalent of spending in terms of repairing a bridge. And we know that here in the US right now, there is a very active discussion about infrastructure, because that's part of what the president is looking towards with his major bill or proposal for this summer. And then a lot of discussion about infrastructure as caregiving, which we know also very much focuses on the invisible and unpaid and uncelebrated work of women. I will kind of link that with how we've responded to the pandemic globally, and then here in the US, where we've seen some steps towards acknowledging that pandemic relief, or who has been most impacted by the pandemic, also happens to overlap and intersect with those who menstruate. We saw a big advance in Congress last year with the stimulus package. It passed the CARES Act when it finally included a provision that's long been on the table to change the IRS, the federal tax classification of menstrual products, with the practical impact being that people who use flexible savings and health savings accounts could now use pre-tax dollars to buy menstrual products. So we saw sort of this shift, maybe a small shift during the pandemic, that acknowledging that those of us in the population who menstruate were those who were often most impacted. And now as we shift to infrastructure as a national priority, we can do the same. So I'm just kind of, as a long way of leading up to the question is, how do you both view kind of the present and future way to frame this work to see legislative success, given this constellation of awareness that we now have? Maybe I'll start with you, Assemblymember Rosenthal, for the US perspective there.
That's a great question, and I think we need to frame it as investing in people power. And one example that was accomplished during our annual budget fight, it's a fight, was giving funding to excluded workers. Now we know that the excluded workers, and both men and women, but lots of women, they were the ones who are often undocumented, in various kinds of situations where they can't reveal their identity. And so they had no help from the government at all. And so we managed to give about, I believe it's around $2 billion across the state in funding for those unappreciated workers, the ones who risked their lives during the pandemic to make sure people were fed, to make sure that, a lot of systems worked. So I think using that kind of people-centered approach is what we have to do. Yes, everyone can see a bridge is falling down. Fixing it creates jobs. That whole cycle of good things that happen when you provide funding for projects. However, we have to, and I think it's happening, center the people who undertake these projects, the people that make bridge repair possible, the people who feed those who make the bridge repair possible. We have to increasingly make them the focus. And it's already there, but it's not assembled in one big overview. So I think that's how we have to do it. And I think we will, because people were so moved by individual stories and about family stories about people who died during the pandemic. And I think everyone has a new appreciation for the people in their lives or the people who helped them during the pandemic. So I think we're off to a good start in terms of reframing the discussion and including people and women as those who lead in society and those who also most need government's help at times. I would also like to add that there are many independent companies started by women that provide fully organic products, that give out products in schools. Many small companies that are organic, started by women as businesses, that now are very popular products. And I'm very proud of them because they started often with an idea. And here they are competing against, the Procter and Gambles of the world, or offering a different way. So it's like all positive here. We can do a lot together.
Yeah, so just to develop what Linda has said, I think, we do have an opportunity to make that shift towards what a well-being economy looks like. This is not about handouts, it is about an investment in people and enabling people to be active citizens, to be active contributors. And I think it's, as we've seen in Scotland, it's good for our education outcomes, it's good for enterprise. People feel included, which is not just a nice thing to have, it's also really smart for our economy and for people who want to measure productivity and important things like that. So I think that when you start to have conversations about, has anyone in this workplace ever had to go home because they bled through their clothes or on the office chair? These things happen, but they happen in secret. And, we all know about people who've had to sneak out with a tampon up their sleeve. So I think when you point that out to employers, managers, particularly to men, they're actually quite horrified about it. And, the majority of them are nice people and they don't want their workers and their families to live their lives like that. So I think we have to give people some credit and let them be part of the conversation and be part of the change. If I can just go back to the point about menstrual well-being and menstrual health, because, even the title for today about menstrual hygiene, you know, provokes a conversation in itself, and I think we will see a shift away from that. But if we can embed this into our curriculum in our schools and our colleges, like we're trying to do in Scotland, and I think in England they're actually a little bit ahead of Scottish schools, but is it making it part of the lessons, part of the curriculum, so that, you know, girls and boys and non-binary kids and trans kids can have these conversations about normal things like periods, and what to do if you're experiencing abnormal pain, really heavy periods. And that's why the issue about endometriosis, so we in Scotland, again, everyone come to Scotland, it's amazing, we have free prescriptions. So obviously we pay through our taxes and we pay towards our National Health Service, but you know, no one has to pay at the point of need for a prescription for medication. So one of the members of Parliament from the Conservative Party suggested that women could get period products on prescription, but that was going to medicalise it as if it's an illness and you're ill and you have to see your doctor to get medication. And that would have been a costly way to do it. But if we can have more conversations at a younger age about what, you know, healthy menstruation looks like, then again, that's so much better for our citizens, for our National Health Service. And again, just in terms of what employers can do, both in terms of, you know, the private sector and you know, public bodies, you know, this is good for your reputation if you get it right. So, you know, surely you want to be known as a period friendly, a menstruation friendly employer, that when people, you know, executives, whatever level it is, if you're trying to attract the best people, the best talent, highly skilled people with good values to come and work in your organisation, you want to show them that you have good values. And again, if you provide free period products and, you know, beyond menstruation, you've got good policies on the menopause as well, let's face it, that's another taboo issue, then you will be the kinds of place people want to come and work and work hard for you. So, you know, it's a win-win situation from my point of view.
Chair, can we turn to, I was going to kind of bundle the questions a little bit. We started a little bit late, so let's keep going. Hopefully folks can stay on. We'll do questions. I've kind of bundled the ones that folks have asked. So actually, this is a really good pivot because somebody asked a question for you about menopause, which I'm thrilled about, because I'm going to share here that I am working on a new book project about menopause and policy. And as somebody who's an older player in this movement, it's highly relevant to me personally. But I'm curious for you to delve in a little bit further there, because I know, especially in the UK, there has been a broader attention paid to menopause, whether it's to include it in secondary school education around menstruation and full life cycle, and also around work policy. And then Assemblymember Rosenthal, if you see anything that could be a potential future for menopause policy on the New York State Legislature's agenda. So let's do that one quick first, and then we'll pivot to a couple of questions about local organizing that folks asked.
Is that back to me, Jennifer?
Why don't we start with you and then take it to Assemblymember Rosenthal? Why don't we try to do menopause in 3 minutes together and local activism in 3 minutes together, and then we'll only be a little late in ending.
Well, I can't wait to see your book project, Jennifer. That sounds amazing. But again, it's similar principles. It's about, you know, you wrote the book, Periods Gone Public, menopause should be out there in the public domain as well. And, you know, when I've had events in Parliament looking at menopause as part of the cross-party group in women's health, it's really concerned me about women who've had to drop out of the labour market because they're perimenopausal or they've gone through the menopause and they've not been supported at work, they've not had flexibility, they've not had reasonable adjustments, and they lose their confidence and they lose their self-esteem. And it just, as a woman who's turned 40 this year during the pandemic, it worries me that, you know, women are never the right age. We're never at the right stage of life to be accepted and valued for who we are. And that's why we've got a big job as a sisterhood globally to lift each other up, because the patriarchy is not going to make that happen anytime soon. So I think the more that we can make it mainstream in schools and education, give people the tools to do it, and especially for those people who are no longer in formal education, it's never too late in life. So that's why we want this to be right through our society. I think in the UK that trade unions have really stepped up, and I can see it becoming more of a workplace issue in terms of policy and in terms of workplace education. So again, I would really encourage people to join a trade union, and through collectivism we can achieve a hell of a lot.
Thank you, Jennifer. You know, there have been more and more articles of late in the media about menopause. There are ones about perimenopause and menopause. And, you know, I think it ties in with how once women go through menopause and are a little older, they are invisible in society. You know, people, they're not considered just part of the conversation anymore. They become invisible to others, and they're valuable. They're even more valuable with their experience. So I agree. The state of healthcare for menopausal and perimenopausal people is abysmal. And I have a few bills about education in prisons and menopause, but it's definitely something I'd love to work on with you. You know, that would be great. We can pass some laws.
I've got a bunch of stuff drafted. We'll talk.
Excellent, excellent. I also want to say I want to move to Scotland for a short period of time because it just sounds so open and progressive. And I live in your district, Monica.
I second that, third that. I've been thinking that the whole time. Like, it really seems quite utopian. So there are a bunch of questions that I guess I want to just kind of bundle together that are sort of similar from folks about, you know, really what legislators need to hear, what local activists should be saying to be most impactful, and so that they, you know, too can sort of not just see the change they want, but understand the value of their voices. How can they be most helpful to you is, I think, the best way to summarize the couple of questions that have come in about how to make change on the ground.
I'll go first because I know we're running short, so I'll say quickly. What I have been most impressed about in this movement is the number of young girls who are involved. I've been at press conferences, maybe one was on Menstrual Hygiene Day some years ago. It was organized by 12-year-olds. I mean, think of when you were 12. What were your concerns? Nothing like this. And so the Empower Women movement has really reached down into the lower grades in school. And the girls are so confident. Maybe it's before that that wave when women lose all confidence for a while in their adolescence, but they are not ashamed to say the word blood and period. And the boys in their classes are used to it now. And that's why I'm so hopeful for the future, is because the stigma and shame surrounding menstruation does not exist among young people. And I think they are ready and have organized themselves and continue to organize themselves to say we need menstrual equity even at our age. And so I'm very hopeful about the future. And so they engage their peers. And, you know, that's very important. And also, of course, women's groups and groups devoted to equity in society also need to raise this up a bit, I think, because we all, to do the final push, we all need to be in this together.
Sure. I mean, I think a grassroots approach is the most effective way. And if you're listening in and you think, well, I like what's been achieved in Scotland, then write to your elected representatives, whether it's your member of parliament, your congresswoman, and ask the question, do you agree that period products are essential items, that they're not luxury items? Start that conversation. And I think, you know, it would be good, I think, if we could have legislation and policy that made sure that we did get equity across a state, across a nation, but it doesn't mean you have to wait for that to happen. So like Grace did, contacting her airport contacts in New York, just draw up a list of people. You know, if you pay for a gym membership, contact the gym. If you're a member of a sports club, ask them to provide period products for free. You know, all you have to do is get a little basket, put them in the basket, nothing fancy is required. I've just got this here, I've got some props in front of me. I've got Jennifer's book, which is like essential reading, it always inspires me. I've got a toilet roll, a loo roll here, because it's sitting on my desk, but no one would expect anyone in any kind of workplace, or imagine I had to sit in Parliament with this because Parliament didn't provide them. It would be ridiculous. So maybe we'll have to go about with these stuck in our heads just to make the point. But it's about making sure that pads, tampons, reusables are accessible. So draw up that list, you know, from your soccer club, if it's baseball you're into, whatever it is, and just say, will you be part of this? And I think there is a lot that young people can do to drive that. And I think more and more the issues around sustainability and tackling climate crisis, that's going to come into fore as well.
That's a good point about the plastics involved with tampons. And so that's another, I guess it's an always expanding agenda.
This has been such an extraordinary way to spend our May 28th to here in the US, kick off a long weekend. And I just want to thank everybody, all of the panelists. You are all extraordinary. And thank you to Girl Up and to Shira and team. It has been so much fun to work with you these past couple weeks. So I guess we're rounding up or rounding down or winding down over time. I'm not sure if there's any closing housekeeping remarks or anything, but this has been just the best hour of my day that I could imagine. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all so much. I mean, just from Amy and myself and, you know, the rest of the team putting this together, we sincerely thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Assemblymember Rosenthal, and thank you, Monica Lennon. We are, I mean, just being here in Scotland, we're so, you know, honored, and, you know, Amy and I have been fangirling, you know, this whole time. So it's just been a pleasure to have all of you, and especially Congresswoman Meng as well. Thank you, and hopefully we'll be able to see you next year with more and more of your fellow legislative champions of period dignity.
Thank you so much. The feeling's mutual, and you're all invited to Scotland for a Menstrual Equity Summit, so we'll get that arranged.
That's great.
Definitely. So in. All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.